All right, good morning, everyone. So this will be our last class. We'll definitely be able to get through the lecture today. We had no problem with that in the section before this. So we will not have class on Friday or Monday. So this is the last one. So a couple of announcements before we get started. I should be releasing your policy brief grades sometime before the end of this week. I just have 9 more to grade in the other class. I'm hoping I can knock those out on Thursday, Friday at the latest. Today's pretty packed, so I may not be able to get to all of them today. Once I have finished grading all of those, I will send everyone an email and let them know. Every time I have to take any points off, I leave a little bullet point in the comment box so you can see why you got the grade that you did. If you have questions, shoot me an email. I'm happy to explain that. So there are 2 extra credit opportunities. The first one is already uploaded on Canvas. So if you click on the extra credit tab in assignments, there is a document. So this basically, I have pre-selected 1 or 3 episodes from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is my favorite show. You are supposed to choose one of those episodes to watch and then list all of the crimes that the main characters commit. I have also included the Pennsylvania Penal Code in there. So you will be listing the crime and the statute number. That is due 11:59, the last day of class, and it will replace your lowest quiz grade. So I add those extra credits in after I have finished grading all of the quizzes. There's no sense in adding them right now because your lowest quiz grade right now may not be your lowest quiz grade once I've done grading them. So I just grade all the quizzes and then I go through and I make those changes. It's pretty hard to keep track of which quiz I'm replacing for everyone. So just kind of keep an eye on your quizzes. Basically, what I do is I just start going across the row of quizzes with your name. And if I see any zeros, I'll just replace that one. If you've taken all your quizzes, then I just go through and find your lowest quiz grade. If you have 5 out of 5s on all of your quizzes, one of them will become a 6. So just kind of keep an eye on it. Sometimes I'm able to tell you which one I did, but usually there are a lot of extra credits to go through, and I don't mark down which of your quizzes I replace. So just kind of keep an eye on it, and then I'll send you an email, and you'll see that one of your quiz grades has been replaced. So the other extra credit opportunity is a little bit more difficult. So the student or the teacher evaluations are up. So if 85% of your class can fill out an evaluation, I will give everyone 1 extra point on the exam. So I have offered this extra credit multiple times, and I have never had a class that's been able to do that. So this is kind of a collective effort. If 85% of you can fill out that evaluation, each of you will get 1 extra raw point on the exam. So if the exam is out of 90 and you got a 70 out of 90, you'd get a 71 out of 90. So it shows me the percentage of students that have taken that evaluation. So like I said, if 85% of you guys can do that, um, you know, I'll give you guys an extra point on the exam. I take those evaluations very seriously. I read every single one. I'm always looking to improve. So any comments that you add, I'm going to go through them. And I love to hear things that you liked about the class, things that you didn't like, things that, didn't help you learn. And, if enough students are saying it, then I'll make the changes that are necessary. I know a lot of students don't do those evaluations, but it's really important for us. Every year during our yearly review, our bosses have them printed out and they will ask us questions about things that students say. So, if you feel really strongly about something, please fill out the evaluation. Like I said, I take them very seriously. I read every single one, and our bosses take them seriously as well. So take that opportunity to give your feedback. And like I said, if 85% of you can do that, you'll get extra credit on the exam. All right. Any questions for me before we get started? All right. So, last thing I'll say, this week in your module, I have posted your study guide. So, if you want to go ahead and start filling that out, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to meet with you to go over your study guide with you. So since today is actually, that wasn't the last thing I was going to say. So since today is our last class, you will be able to take your last quiz starting today at 10 a.m. But I've left the window open until Saturday morning as well. So you'll have from today at 10 a.m. until Saturday at 10 a.m. to take your last quiz. Ashley and Grace, I see you two here. If you two just want to stick around after class, I'll just have you guys play live for extra credit on the final exam. All right. Okay, well, let's get started on the last lecture of this semester. Okay. All right, so today what we are going to talk about is this sort of narrative identity that I've been sort of hinting to. So we are going to talk about a really famous study today, the Liverpool Desistance Study. So we spoke on Monday about phenomenological criminology, which is the attempt to sort of get someone's subjective understanding of, their worldview, who they are, where they stand in society. And today we're going to look at a really famous study that compares this sort of narrative identity, this worldview between people that seem to persist in criminal activity and those that are able to desist to see if they sort of think differently. So let's start talking about the Liverpool Desistance Study. So, in and of itself, subjective explanations of the desistance process are pretty vague. So, the Liverpool Desistance Study was explicitly intended to overcome the inherent vagueness of self identity research. So, this study was an empirical analysis of the phenomenological or the subjective aspects of desistance. So, it involved a systematic comparison of the self narratives of people that were able to desist from crime and then compared the self narratives of a carefully matched sample of people that were persisting in criminal activity. So we've got people that seem to persist in criminal activity, that keep committing crimes, carefully matched to those people that have been able to desist from criminal activity. And we're going to compare their sort of self narratives. So, by isolating ways in which members of these two groups differ in their worldviews and their self perspectives, this research is an attempt to specify the cognitive adaptations and self understandings that may help an ex offender make good and stay that way. So, this research takes advantage of the recent theoretical and methodological insights in narratology, or the narrative study of lives. So, this is the type of research we're talking about. Narratology basically just means getting people's life stories and sort of boiling it down to an understanding of the way that they think. So, the data for narratology are the stories that individuals tell to account for their behavior. So basically, people that are taking part in narratology are just having really sort of in depth interviews or conversations with people. You just kind of want to hear their life story. That's the whole way that you gather this data. So, what's interesting about this is that the focus from this data, these stories, isn't the facts that they contain, but the meanings that individuals attach to these facts. So, how they choose to frame their life events. So, you'll see in the next slide, the facts of these people's lives are strikingly similar, but what is different is how they view these facts or how they frame them in their sort of worldview. That's really what you're interested in here. So, unlike personality traits, which tend to be largely stable over time, a person's narrative identity can and does change throughout their life. So, your personality traits don't change very much. It's that narrative identity that seems to change over the life course. So if you think about the way that you viewed the world and the way that you viewed yourself when you were like 15 years old compared to now, I'm sure you see very striking differences between the two. And that's kind of what we're looking for here is the way that you see yourself and the way that you view the world. So your personality traits probably haven't changed much over the life course, but if you think back to the way that you saw yourself and you saw the world at, several points in your life, especially if, several years have gone between them, you can probably see clear differences in the way that you view the world. So, narrative theorists generally argue that identity is a lifelong project that individuals continuously restructure in light of new experiences and new information. So, it's very similar to belief updating. So, as we experience things, the way that we view the world changes. Oh, sorry. This pollen has me very stuffed up today. So, the original goal of this study was to find a group of D sisters and carefully match them to a group of per sisters. Well, it wasn't that simple because, like we talked about on Monday, desistance is kind of an ongoing thing. So, every time these researchers thought they had a perfect group of D sisters and per sisters, someone from the desisting group would commit a crime and they'd have to move over to the persisting group. So, like I said, even like a 5 or 10 year crime free period doesn't guarantee that this person has desisted from crime. So finding that solid group of sample of people that desisted and were persisters, that took a lot longer than they expected. All right, so remember, narratology isn't interested in the facts that these people have, it's how they view these facts. So let's start by looking at the facts of the samples to see if there were differences. So remember, we're comparing D sisters and per sisters. So although each participant in this research study has a unique personal history and faces singular life challenges, there were very similar characteristics shared by the per sisters and the D sisters. So the first thing that they did was look at criminogenic traits, and they looked at the Big Five Index, which is a standardized personality test that they gave to the Per sisters and the D sisters. So the Big Five Index was designed to measure the 5 overarching traits thought to make up a person's basic disposition. So I'll just give you the 5 traits. You don't have to write this down, but it's things like agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, openness to experience. And what they found is between the Per sisters and the D sisters, they had very similar or similar characteristics among the Big Five Index. So they didn't see many significant differences between the Per sisters and the D sisters when they looked at the Big Five Index scores. What they did see is when they compare the Per sisters and the D sisters to the general population that had not been incarcerated, that's where they saw differences in the Big Five Index. So apparently, a person's basic disposition, those that are incarcerated, they have different dispositions than the ones that have not been incarcerated. But when you're looking at the incarcerated sample, you don't see differences in the basic disposition between those that persist in criminal activity and those that are able to desist from it. So no differences for the persisters and the desisters with the Big Five Index, so their disposition. Now let's look at the facts of their life, so the criminogenic backgrounds. So we saw very few differences between the persisters and the desisters here. So the experience of growing up in an economically disadvantaged circumstance affected the lives of almost all of the participants in this sample, regardless of if they were persisters or desisters. So 80% of the participants in the desisting and persisting groups said that they grew up in an area considered dangerous or bad. So we didn't see differences between, it wasn't the neighborhood that, helped them decide to be desisters or persisters. They grew up in, both of them grew up in bad neighborhoods. We also saw that both samples grew up with parents that were unemployed. So over 80% of the D sisters and 75% of the Per sisters said that growing up, their parents had either been unemployed, sporadically unemployed, or employed as an unskilled laborer. Additionally, over half of both groups grew up in single parent households. So about 50% of each sample, Per sisters and D sisters, had single parent households. A third of both groups reported that they had been the victim of child abuse. So no differences there either. And we saw no differences in terms of their criminal record or drug abuse. So the average age of the first arrest was 15 for the desisting group and 14 for the persistent group. Regarding drug abuse, almost every single participant had some experience with drug abuse. 93% of the D sisters and 95% of the Per sisters admitted to regular drug use at some point in their life. And 2/3 of both groups said that at some point they had been addicted or dependent on alcohol and drugs. So, what we're seeing here is that the facts of these people's lives, whether they were persistent in criminal activity or were able to desist from crime, the facts look the same. So, if the Per sisters and the D sisters had such similar characteristics, what was different between these groups? So, when they did this study, the first thing they did was sort of find out these characteristics. They gave them that Big Five personality index. They went through and they coded all of their lives. The next thing that they did was sit them down and give them what's referred to as the life story interview, which usually takes several days. Basically, what we're trying to get at is that narrative identity. So, like I said, all their facts sound the same. Now, the interview is trying to figure out how they see themselves in view of the world. So, the Per sisters had seemed to have a subjective view of themselves that the researchers began to refer as the condemnation script. And we're going to go through the three components or the three themes that make up part of the condemnation script. Now, the D sisters, on the other hand, had something that the researchers referred to as the redemption script. So we're going to go over the condemnation script, and in your reading, you're going to learn all about the redemption script. So it wasn't the facts of their lives that were different. It seemed to be the way that they viewed the world. So let's talk about the condemnation script, which is how the Per sisters viewed the world. So the offenders in the persistent group said that they are sick of offending, they were sick of prison, and they were sick of their position in life. Most of them said that they felt doomed to deviance and that they felt powerless to change their behavior because of one of those characteristics that we went through. So drug addiction, poverty, a lack of education or skills, social prejudice. So those that seem to persist in criminal activity seem to take those facts of their life, and they felt that because of those facts that they were doomed to deviance. They said that they want to change, but they don't have any choice. They're doomed to deviance because they're addicted to drugs, because they don't have any education, because society is prejudiced against them because they've been incarcerated. Most of them said that they largely saw their life scripts as being written for them a long time ago. So they felt that they didn't have any control over their lives because of these factors. And because of that, they were doomed to a life of deviance. So most of them, when you ask them, part of the life story interview is to ask people about turning points in their lives. And again, you're not super interested in what those turning points are, but how they framed it. So most of the people that were the Per sisters said that they seemed to view the turning points in their life as something that happened to them, that's something that they didn't have any control over. So usually a turning point for most people, especially people in the redemption script, is a way to turn their life around. But for people in the condemnation script, it's something that happened to them that chose the perspective or chose the trajectory of their life. So for instance, one offender said he got along with the good kids and he got along with the bad kids. But when he was arrested and placed in front of the judge, and the judge decided that he was going to juvenile detention center, he said, the judge made that choice for me. So I could have gone either way since I got along with the good kids and I got along with the bad kids. Since the judge chose to send me to juvenile detention center, he made that choice for me. He's the reason I'm on this negative trajectory. So that's an example of feeling powerless, right? Like he says he didn't have any control over it. It was the judge that made that choice for him. So these offenders see no hope for change in their lives, and they've generally accepted the fate that's been handed to them, that they've been dealt a bad hand. They're doomed to this lifestyle. So that's one of the themes of the condemnation script, is that this person feels doomed to deviance, that they're powerless to change their behavior. These things just seem to happen to them that push them in one direction, that they're not capable of being able to change that negative trajectory. So the other thing that's pretty common with the condemnation script is this understanding of escaping the burden of choice. So this often happens when the offender becomes this part of the cycle of prison and begins to view themselves as the victim of society. So I actually see this a lot. So a lot of times offenders, especially if they have spent a good deal of time going in and out of prison, when they come out of prison, they feel like society owes them something. They feel like they are the victim, that they come out of prison and they're trying to wipe the slate clean. They're trying to rejoin society, but they see so many obstacles in their way that they feel like they are the victim. So this happens a lot with offenders, and there's kind of two ways that you can take this. And if you feel this way, a lot of them feel like the society owes it to them to allow them to sort of kick their heels up and let loose, which is a lot of the reason why they wind up back in prison. So part of that is that they feel like society owes them that. The other part is that they're so irritated that so much of their life has been controlled because they've been incarcerated. And usually, when they're released, they're on parole or some sort of supervision. So, a lot of their choices are controlled for them. They want to take back some of that control and make some decisions on their own. Usually, those are bad decisions like doing drugs, getting drunk, making mistakes, doing things that can violate their conditions of release, or things that are illegal that get them sent back to prison. So we see that as one way of sort of escaping the burden of choice, is that, they feel that society owes them this chance to kick their heels up, or they feel like they need the opportunity to finally make a decision for themselves. Or it can go another way. Sometimes what they will do is fail on purpose because that is less stressful than trying and failing. And I see this outside of ex offenders. I see people in all areas of society escaping the burden of choice. It's easier on your ego to say, I didn't even try and that's why I failed, instead of saying, I tried my hardest and I still failed. So a lot of these offenders have spent their lives in and out of prison, and their family is tired of hearing them say, this is the time I'm going to do well, right? So they will tell everyone that can listen, I'm not going back to prison. I'm doing well this time. And it's super stressful on them for all these people to have high hopes of them doing well and then to fail. It's less stressful on them, and it's less of a blow on their ego if they say, well, I failed on purpose. I didn't even try. And a lot of them will fail on purpose. One, because it's less stressful, but two, because they feel doomed to deviance. In their mind, it's only a matter of time before they go back. So for them, that's another way to gain some control over their life, is to say, I'll be the judge of when I go back. I'll decide when I go back. I'll fail on purpose so that it's not this thing that's looming over me constantly. I know at some point I'm not in control of my own circumstances. I'm going back because I'm doomed to deviance. I'll make this decision for me. So, sabotaging their life's chances with alcohol and drugs may be the best available excuse for not living up to their expectations or people's expectations of them. The last thing, or sort of the last theme of the condemnation script that you see a lot, is something that we refer to as offending wisdom. So the persistent offenders in this sample viewed themselves as a victim of circumstance. They claim that they have a clear picture of the good life, but they don't feel that they have the ability to get there on their own volition. So a lot of times you'll hear offenders say something like, that's not the life for me, or that's not a life that I can get. That's an example of offending wisdom, because again, they feel doomed to deviance. They feel like they don't have control over their lives. So yeah, we know they know what it takes to be someone that's, a productive member of society, but that's not something that's possible for them. And so as a result of that, a lot of them will fail on purpose. And when you've spent most of your adult life in and out of prison, I mean, I get it. They feel like it's just not possible for them. And the irony of the situation about offending wisdom is that they just might be right. So the condemnation script that the persistent offender constructs for themselves may not be an accurate assessment of reality, but it certainly conforms to societal wisdom about deviance, criminality, and a measure of one's personal success. We know the biggest predictor of future criminal activity is previous criminal activity. So those are three of the big themes of the condemnation script. And the reading explains the other side. It gives the view of the subjective understanding of those who are actually able to successfully desist from a life of crime. And that's what we refer to as the redemption script. So just quickly in terms of policy implications, so far this should all make sense. So we've seen thus far that any treatment that focuses on cognitive therapy seems to work best in the rest of the available rehabilitative treatments. So if we can fix the internal thought process of these offenders, in other words, get them to be out, get rid of this condemnation script and to think more like the redemption script, then perhaps they can make the changes necessary to leave behind a life of crime. So the reading that you have looks really long, but it looks long because they will spend a little bit of time describing a theme like I did, like doomed deviance. And then they'll give you a bunch of quotes from the offender so that you can see how they got that theme out of that quote. So it looks longer than it is because the quotes are like block quotes in the middle of a paragraph and it just like takes up like a small space. Or like it takes up a like it's like tabbed, indented in. So it looks like it takes up more room than it is. And this was a study done in Liverpool, which is in the UK. So you see a lot of UK slang and a lot of curse words in there, just to warn you, but they're usually pretty hysterical quotes. Like I said, interviewing ex or offenders is one of my favorite things to do. Some of those, they are really hysterical people. They've had a lot of really interesting life experiences, but usually the quotes that these people give are pretty pretty X-rated and R-rated. So just be forewarned, some of these quotes are full of curse words and some are full of UK curse words, so they might be interesting to hear. So even though the reading looks really long, most of it is quotes from these offenders and it's less, empirical writing. But make sure that you go through and you're going to want to pull out those three so there are three themes from the condemnation script that we covered today, and there are three themes from the redemption script as well. And you'll see it. They'll give you, I think they actually put them in numbers like 1, 2, 3, and then they go through and describe them. And if I'm telling you all this, this probably means it's an essay question. So do your reading. All right. So the last thing we're going to talk about is a similar study to the Liverpool desistance study, but instead of qualitative research, like the desistance study was, which is, a bunch of interviews, this was a quantitative study that was measuring kind of the same thing. So, this Roque and colleagues study in 2016, the goal here was to provide a quantitative test of the notion that changes in the self or identity are a major factor in the desistance from crime. So they had a huge sample between the ages of 12 and 31, and they followed them over several years. I believe they followed them for 10 or so years, and every 2 years they would give them an interview. So they interviewed these people 5 times. So their independent variable was your personal identity. So it was 5 interviews over a 10-year period. And it was on a 5-point scale, like a Likert scale. This one was sort of never to always. It would be things like, do you think of yourself as a good person? Are you a delinquent? Do you feel that you're mean? Do you feel dishonest? Do you feel that you cannot be trusted? So just thinking about that first one, do you think of yourself as a good person? So, or do you think of yourself as a delinquent? That's probably a better understanding right there. So if you think of the condemnation script that we just discussed, those people definitely see themselves as delinquents. They feel that they're delinquents because they have no control over their life, but they definitely feel like they are a delinquent. When you do the reading for the redemption script, you're going to see that one of the qualities that these people have is something that they refer to as the real me. So they kind of see themselves as, I've always been a good person. It's just that when I was younger, that wasn't the real me. So if you kind of think back to the first sort of discussion that we had about this, so this phenomenological, so Neil Shover's understanding of desistance, this acquisition of an altered perspective of their youthful activities, that's what I mean. So the youthful activities, the way that they behaved as a youngin', that wasn't the real them. They've always been a good person. It's just that wasn't them at that time. So you can even see in this quantitative understanding, the way that they were sort of framing this pro-social identity was kind of, do you have this condemnation script or do you have this redemption script? That's kind of what they're getting at right there with those 5 interviews. So they interviewed them over a 10-year period, 5 different interviews, and they also collected data to use as control variables. So gender, race, parental attachment, friends delinquency, grades, type of work, children, marital status, social class, employment, so on and so forth. So what they found first is that pro-social identity, so thinking that one's a good person and not a troublemaker, so redemption versus condemnation is really what we're seeing here, tends to increase over time and plateau in the mid-20s. So the first thing that this study showed was that it's possible for one's identity to change over time. The other thing that they found, their dependent variable here was crime. And they said that identity remained a significant and robust predictor of crime over time. So individuals with more pro-social identities were less likely to engage in crime when compared to individuals with less pro-social identities over time. And that as someone's pro-social identity increased, they were less likely to engage in crime. And like I said, they included all of these other control variables. No matter how many control variables they threw into the model, identity was able to stay significant. So so the other individual characteristics were not able to explain away the power of identity on crime. So we have two separate studies that show the power of identity. The first one is the really famous Liverpool Desistance Study. It's based on those super long interviews. The second one was they were quantifying the interviews because they were asking them Likert scale questions like never to always. So it's a lot easier to quantify that and to put that in a data set than it is to just, those are what we refer to as closed-ended questions when you give them the categories to answer. Open-ended interviews where you just ask a question and they give their own answer, you can't really quantify that and put that in a data set. You just kind of have to count the themes that you see. So we've seen two separate studies, qualitative and quantitative, that have shown the power of identity in predicting criminal behavior. So in terms of policy implications, correctional programming that directly targets the cognitive thinking process should be given precedence. We can see the power of the identity in the way that one thinks. So this explains why we have seen all semester that cognitive behavioral programs seem to be the most effective. So our policy implication from this class is that cognitive behavioral therapy seems to work the best. That should be given precedence over everything else. Unfortunately, it's the most expensive, which is why we see a lot of correctional programs don't use that. Other policy implications that we can get from this are to use redemption policies and restorative justice programs. I'll go into a little more detail about those, but both of those things, what they do is, while the cognitive behavioral treatment can sort of change your identity, the redemption policies and the restorative justice programs help solidify that identity change. So a redemption policy includes things like rites of passage ceremonies, indicating to the individual and to the community that the offender status has been shed, and encouraging successful reintegration. So this is any sort of policy that sort of or ceremony or program that shows that this is a new person. So a perfect example of that, they did this in Florida. They don't do this in South Carolina because they said it was a security concern. I'm not really sure how, but in Florida, when they were done with the dog training cycles in prison, so they usually train them in 8 to 10 weeks. And after that 8 to 10 weeks, the dogs go back to the shelter. They go up for adoption. A lot of them are already adopted and can go to their home, but the inmates get a new batch of dogs after that. But what they do is at the end of those 8 to 10 week cycles, they hold a little graduation ceremony and they're celebrating the offender and the dog. They can invite in the people that have adopted the dogs, the community, the family and friends of the offender, and it's just kind of a nice little ceremony to sort of show that this offender has done something good. So it's really one of the only times that the offenders get a chance to sort of interact with the public in a less controlled environment and get to sort of act like someone that's not incarcerated. Restorative justice programs can be helpful too. These are programs that help offenders reach their goals, can help assist them in building their narrative identity. So things like victim offender mediation, any rehabilitation program that helps them reintegrate into society. So that turning leaf program that we talked about that's the cognitive behavioral therapy program that's given to them once they've been released from prison. So that's a cognitive behavioral therapy and restorative justice program. Any sort of program that helps solidify their new identity can be very helpful. All right. Questions for me? No questions? Well done this semester. You've almost made it. I will send you several emails over the next few days. I'll email you as soon as your policy brief grades are uploaded. I will email you an email about the final exam. Just a quick word about that. I got to look at the exam schedule. Basically, I give you 24 hours to take your exam. It's very similar to the midterm. So whatever time and date you would have this exam, if we were in person, you're going to have 24 hours from that date to take the exam. So for instance, if this, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 a.m. takes their exam May 5th at 1 p.m., you would have from May 5th at 1 p.m. until May 6th at 1 p.m. to take the exam. So I'll send an email to you guys letting you know about that. It will also be same format as last time, Respondus lockdown browser, Respondus monitor. So Big Brother is going to be watching you. Remember, it's audio and visual. So if you have a constant stream of curse words in the background, I'm going to hear that. I don't really care about that. It's only if I hear your roommate or your friend feeding answers to you. That's the problem. So I'll email you guys about that. I'll email you once I have all the quizzes graded and I go through the extra credits. I'll email everybody to let them know that their grades have been changed, that if they submitted an extra credit, their lowest quiz grade has been replaced. If you want me to go over your study guide, shoot me an email. I'm happy to schedule a meeting with you to help you with that. All right. And don't forget to take the evaluation. If 85% of you guys do it, you'll get an extra credit point on the final exam. Maybe you guys can be the first class to do it. That would be very impressive. Anything else?
Ma'am, I just want to talk to you after class.
Okay. I do have the 2 students that will be staying on to take the quiz. Is that something you feel comfortable discussing in front of other people or not?
I'll just email you then. It's fine.
Okay. Yep. That sounds good. Okay. Anything else?